Four things I wish I learned a lot sooner than I did. What's up, side hustlers, entrepreneurs, business builders, and dream makers? Welcome to the Study of Side Hustle Podcast, episode 85. It is great to be back in your buds once again. Happy Monday if you're listening on day of upload. Happy whatever day of the week it is for you. For everybody else who doesn't listen on day of upload. Today, I'm going to talk to you guys about 4 lessons that I have learned in my business career that I wish I would have learned sooner. Some of these are things that you hear and you just don't believe it until you live out life experience. Some of them are things that if I could shake younger me and say, hey, just do this and make younger me listen, I would. And so this is me trying to shake you if you haven't learned this lesson yet and say, hey, I've been where you are. I've learned these lessons the hard way. I don't want you to have to learn these lessons the hard way. So that being said, let's get into it. Lesson number 1. When you're starting out a business, you have a couple clients, or maybe you don't have any clients yet, and you get an opportunity to work with a new client, or you have an existing client who's paying you every month, and for one reason or another, you have tension with that relationship. Things aren't making sense. Things aren't clicking anymore. When you're in a position where you're considering whether or not to fire a client, or you're considering whether or not to hire a client. So in that position, one of the things that I wish I would have learned sooner is simply, if you ever feel like you're not able to step away from the table, if you sit down at a table where you feel like you have to make a deal, you feel like you can't afford to not make the deal, or if you're keeping a client because you feel like you can't afford to fire the client, if you're ever in a position where you feel like you cannot afford to walk away from the table, you have a moral obligation to yourself and to your business to walk away from that table. Okay? Because there's only a couple reasons why you would actually not be able to walk away from the table. One is this client is a whale, which means if you have this client, they're responsible for 20, 45, 65, 85% of your business, right? If you have this client, you'll feel like you have a stable business, but if you lose them, then you'll realize you didn't have a stable business. You had a job under a different contract, and you don't actually have a business without that client. In that case, what happens is this client ends up getting full control of your business, and you do effectively turn into an employee. Even if you have a team, your team effectively turns into employees for that company, for that client, whoever that is, for that individual, whatever your business is, but you end up working for them rather than running a business. And that just gives them an overwhelming amount of control over you, the decisions you make. It creates this natural scope bleed where you keep doing more and more to satisfy the client. And there's just no healthy outcome in that world. So when you have a client that is a whale, you have a couple options on what to do about it. One is you can land other whales. 2 is you can refuse that client service. Those are kind of it. Or 3, get a lot more other clients so that when you lose that one, it's not that big of a deal. The only other reason that I know of where you would consider it a table that you can't walk away from, besides them paying so much that it's a game changer for your business, is the potential for future revenue. And that might come because they've convinced you that they have a network that they're going to expose you to, or they've convinced you about future work later where they themselves will turn into a whale. Either way, it ends up giving you the same relationship dynamic where if you believe that, you become dependent on them. And again, you're no longer the business owner. You're just an employee by another name. And nothing against being an employee, by the way. I just know that when you decided to start a business, it's not because you wanted to work for somebody else. And taking on a whale of a client, sitting down at a table and signing a deal that you feel like you have to sign, that's a way of making sure you actually do work for somebody else, which is why you owe it to your business to say no to those deals, even or to get up and leave and fire those clients, no matter how hard it actually is. Now, in this case, I'm actually speaking from very, very recent personal experience. In fact, at time of recording, I lost my largest client today. My largest client in my company was paying me a amount that in percentage was way too high. It wasn't the majority of my income, but it was a very, very large minority of my income. Way too much of the business's revenue was coming from this sole client. And as a consequence, I felt the desire to fire this client for several weeks, and I didn't do it because I'm looking at the finances and I'm saying, yeah, I don't know that we can afford to fire that client though. And then It turns out that what I was experiencing correlated pretty well with what they were experiencing, and they decided to let our contract lapse and terminate our working relationship together. They fired us. So we're no longer providing services for this client, which means we just lost a large minority of our revenue. And now, looking at the numbers, I'm looking at this and going, wow, actually, while it hurts and I'm not happy about it, we will be fine. And that's what I want you to get out of this is whenever you have a table that you feel like you can't get up from, a deal that you feel like you can't leave, you can and you should, the sooner the better, because you can recover. And if it's on your terms, it's something you get to prepare for. In this case, it happened to be close enough on my terms that I happen to already have been prepared for it. But in general, that's just you don't want to be in a position where you end up getting your business taken away from you because a client's not happy. And a quick way to do that is to have a client that is paying way too much comparably to every other one of your clients. Number 2 is the good thing about hard things. And this is a tough one to convince yourself is true. And I'm training myself to believe it in a new area of my business right now. Okay. The good thing about hard things is that nobody does them. Why is that good? Because it means that in order to be good at those things, you just have to be the one who does them. For example, this is the example of my business, and I'm teaching myself this lesson right now because I've learned this lesson in other areas of business, and I'm now applying it to this area. Cold outreach, outbound sales. Yeah. So for the most part, most businesses understand that if I make 10,000 cold calls, I will get clients. We know that. We know it's a numbers game. We know it's brutal. We don't want to do it, but we know it works, right? And knowing that, most of us spend most of our time when we're considering marketing, we're considering how to grow the business, trying to come up with strategies in this like stuck space where like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what I should be doing right now. And well, that's not true. We know that there's this hard thing that we should be doing that if we did it, it would get us results. And we don't want to do it. So the crazy thing about that is like nobody does cold calls and nobody does cold email and nobody does cold DMs. And when I say nobody, obviously tons of people do. We get these calls all the time. We get these DMs all the time, right? My point is we don't have nearly as much competition in this space as we do in running ads or creating content. Those things are things that everybody tries to do because if they can work, they're a lot nicer experientially. They're not the hard thing. They're the easy, fun, exciting thing in their brand building, right? So the good thing about hard things is that because so few people do them, you don't need to be nearly as good at them to get better results. So in my business, I don't have a cold outbound strategy in place, primarily because I don't feel like I have a product or a service that makes sense for cold outbound strategies. So what I'm doing is 2 things. I'm benefiting from this twice. One is I'm building a top of the funnel tripwire type product specifically so that I can do cold outbound with it and see how it goes. If that ends up opening up a new marketing stream for us, that's fantastic. We can grow the business from it, and it can be a healthy way of ensuring that we have control of our revenue, our income, and our growth. But the second one is initially, I'm going to be the one doing all the work. And why is that beneficial? Because one of the things that I know leads to being more successful in life is having done the hard things nobody's willing to do, because it changes who you are as a person. Be the person who is disciplined enough to do the things you don't want to do and do it enough. It will fundamentally change who you are. If you made 10,000 cold calls, the person I'd be talking to at the end of that is not the same person I'm talking to right now. And that's where the personal development side is going to come from. I've never made 10,000 cold calls before, but this time next year, I will have. And as a result of having done that, I will be a different person. I will think differently. I will talk to people differently. And I can't fully wrap my head around exactly what that means because I haven't done it yet. But I do know people who have, and everybody I know who has is better in very particular areas that I desire to be better at than I am. So I'm going to do what they did to get the results that they've gotten, and we're going to see how that impacts my business. The good thing about hard things is that nobody does them, and therefore, if you're willing to, it's an easier route than the easy way you're doing that everybody does. It's kind of paradoxical like that. Number 3, this goes along with number 2, but it has a statistical backing and it's a good headspace to put yourself in. And that is what I call the N30 principle. Whenever you try something new, you have no idea whether or not it works. And you have no idea whether or not it's something you should keep doing. So we need a benchmark that we set that's objective and standardized and never changes, that's outside of us, that convinces us to do the thing enough to get sufficient data. The benchmark that I recommend is do the thing 30 times. Why? Well, one, it turns out that 30 is the minimum number of data points that you need in any scenario for a statistical analysis to be viable. If you don't have 30, you don't actually have the ability to say whether or not something works statistically. I say this as a stats minor, by the way. So there's one. 2 is you just need motivation to get yourself to do it. If it's cold calling, you need something to convince yourself to keep pushing forward after you've made 3 cold calls. And as a solopreneur, if you are a solopreneur, then you're going to be in that position where 3 hard calls in a row are going to make you not want to make the 4th. You got to N30 principle. You got to do 30 calls. Now, Alex Hormozi, I know you all know his name, right? Alex Hormozi actually elevates this, and his standard is the standard I'm going to be operating off of. He says, no. He has what he calls his 100 rule, our rule of 100. And what he says is you make 100 cold calls 100 days in a row, and then you assess. Wow, 100 cold calls 100 days in a row. That's 10,000 calls. And he says that that's the way he approaches any new marketing strategy, is he does 100 by 100, no matter what it is. So when it's talking about ads, he spends $100 a day for 100 days. That's 10 grand in ad spend. When it's something like this, a physical activity where you're making calls, he does 100 calls times 100 days. That's 10,000 calls. And then he assesses whether or not it's worth continuing. Now, the difference between the N30 principle that I recommend and the rule of 100 that Alex recommends is when Alex is talking about it with those kind of numbers, what he's done is actually tested and retested and modified and adjusted over time to get better and better results. So by the end of his experiment, he's gotten in reps in a way that I haven't. When I say N30 N30 is 1 call script. And then you can do a second call script 30 more times and then compare the 2. And those can still add up to effectively getting us in a very similar spot. I like his because it's more long thinking, and that actually aligns really well with lesson number 4. Lesson number 4 is just time frames. When you're 18 and trying to start a business, you think I'm going to be a millionaire in the next 6 months. And I'm not going to lie to you. There is a statistically very tiny subset of humans who do this. And then those people make huge social presences. And therefore, they make it look like the norm. But statistically speaking, those people don't actually exist in the society. There aren't anywhere near enough people in the world who've done that for us to think it's a reasonable goal. And the area where this is important is not me telling you you can't do it, because you can't. There are exceptions to every statistic, and I know a lot of them personally. But you can do that. And I'm not going to be the person who discourages you from trying. I am going to be the person who discourages you from trying a different thing every 6 months. I'm going to say, no, become a millionaire in 6 months. Do it. Get to 10 million in 18 months. Do it. Get to 100 million in 4 years. Do it. Whatever your goal is, shoot for it. But, maybe you're more like me, and after a decade, you're making decent money. That's fine too. Never stop, never quit. Here's why, after a decade, I'm only making decent money. Because every 6 months, I had a different goal. I had a different vehicle. I was trying something new. And that gets you stuck. So, yeah, you can do it in 6 months, potentially. But if you focus on it for 5 years, it's basically guaranteed. And that's where timeframes are important. If we give ourselves a long enough time frame, if I'm saying I'm going to commit to this one thing for the next decade of my life, if you're willing to say that and then actually do it and follow through, you're going to get infinitely further than most people who think they can do things quickly. So if you think in the mindset of let's hit these huge goals, but whether or not we hit them, I'm committed to this thing for the next decade, you're way more likely to see way more success than if you think this is only going to take me 6 months. That's what I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for letting me talk in your buds for a minute. Hey, if you want a copy of my book where I teach everything that I've learned in the past decade on how to start a business from scratch, I have a link for that in the description, and I'm actually giving away signed copies of the book 100% free. I just ask that you cover shipping and handling. So if you want that, go to the description, click on the link, get your free signed copy of the book. And either way, I will see you guys in the next episode. God bless.